Chapter 1: The Cursed Birth. The night Gregor was born, the heavens bled. A rare and terrible omen, a blood-red moon, hung in the sky, casting its eerie glow over the village of Dragma. The midwife, an old woman with decades of experience in bringing life into the world, trembled as she reached for the newborn. The infant did not wail as most did. Instead, he opened his eyes, and the room fell into a breathless silence. One of his eyes was as dark as the deepest abyss, absorbing the candlelight and refusing to let it escape. The other gleamed like molten gold, shimmering as though it contained the very fire of the sun. The midwife gasped and made the sign of protection across her chest, stepping back. She had delivered hundreds of children, but never had she seen anything like this. His mother, Ilara, lay weak from the birth, reaching out a trembling hand toward her son. "What is it? What do you see?" she asked, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. The midwife hesitated. "The child, he bears the mark of something beyond us." A shadow moved in the doorway. The village elder, a man named Father Aldrich, had been waiting outside, summoned by the strange howling of the wind that had begun the moment the child's first breath was drawn. He stepped forward, peering down at the infant. The golden eye seemed to glow in the dim candlelight, watching him, judging him. The elder exhaled deeply. "The prophecy," he murmured. The room grew colder, the candle flames flickering wildly as if reacting to some unseen force. Outside, the villagers huddled in their homes, whispering prayers against the unnatural wind that tore through the trees. An old woman, hunched with age, clutched her talisman and muttered, "A child born under the bleeding moon, ill fortune will follow him." But others remembered the old legends differently. Or great power, a younger man countered. The ancient texts speak of one who will walk between light and shadow, whose gaze will unsettle even the bravest of men. A childhood marked by fear and awe. As Gregor grew, it became clear that he was unlike the other children of Dragma. By the age of 3, the animals in the village refused to go near him. Dogs that once played in the streets whimpered and cowered when he approached. The horses in the stable would rear back in panic. Birds, which usually nested in the thatched roofs of the homes, abandoned any house he entered. Even the cattle, usually docile, would snort and stomp their hooves when his golden eye met theirs. The villagers whispered behind closed doors, their fear growing with each passing year. Some believed Gregor was cursed. Others thought he had been touched by something divine, or something infernal. Strange occurrences followed in his wake. When he was 5, a group of boys attempted to bully him, throwing rocks and calling him names. That very night, the leader of the group fell into a feverish sleep, writhing and screaming about shadows in the corners of his room. The illness lasted 3 days, and when he finally awoke, his hair had turned stark white. He never spoke Gregor's name again. By the time he was 8, storms would gather without warning whenever he was upset. On one occasion, after being scolded harshly by the village priest, a sudden gust of wind shattered the stained glass window of the church, though the air outside had been still moments before. When he was 10, an arrogant hunter scoffed at the stories of Gregor's unnatural presence and boasted that he did not fear him. That same night, he set out into the forest, determined to prove his bravery. He never returned. His body was found 3 days later, his face frozen in an expression of unspeakable terror. No beast had touched him, and yet he had perished nonetheless. The villagers feared him, but none dared act against him. Even those who wished to rid themselves of the boy found that their courage faltered when they met his gaze. There was something in his eyes, especially the golden one, that made men hesitate, made their breath catch in their throats. It was not the look of a child. It was the look of something ancient. The elder's warning. When Gregor turned 12, the village elders gathered in secret. They had tolerated his presence long enough, but as his power grew, so did their fear. They remembered the ancient prophecy, one that spoke of a child who would walk between the realms of men and things beyond. The texts were unclear. Was he a savior or a harbinger of destruction? Father Aldrich, who had watched Gregor since his birth, spoke gravely. We can no longer ignore what he is. The time will come when we must decide, do we cast him out, or do we prepare for what his existence may bring? A silence settled over the room. The answer was not clear, but one thing was certain: Gregor was no ordinary boy. He was something the world had not seen before. And even the wisest among them did not know whether he was destined for greatness or doom. Outside, beneath the glow of the ever-watchful moon, Gregor sat alone on a hill overlooking the village, his golden eye reflecting the light like a distant fire. He could not hear the elders' whispers, but he did not need to. He already knew. He had always known. Chapter 2: The Devil's Bargain. Gregor had become a man of quiet legend, though he had never sought it. Stories of his uncanny presence spread far beyond the village where he was born. Travelers passing through spoke of the strange youth whose very shadow seemed to unsettle the earth, whose gaze was said to pierce through lies, and whose presence bent the forces of nature themselves. Some called him blessed. Others cursed. All agreed on one thing: he was unlike any man they had ever known. It was on a moonless night, as the wind whispered through the gnarled trees, that the stranger came. Gregor had been tending to his fire, the orange embers flickering in the vast darkness. The night was colder than it should have been, and though the air was still, an unnatural hush had fallen over the world. Even the insects, the owls, the distant wolves had gone silent. Then, the voice came. Do you not wonder why you are different? Gregor did not startle. He merely lifted his gaze, his golden eye reflecting the firelight while the other remained dark as the abyss itself. Before him stood a man, if man he could be called, tall and elegant, draped in a cloak as black as the void. His face was handsome, almost too much so, with features too perfect, too symmetrical, as if sculpted by the hands of something beyond mortal comprehension. His eyes shimmered, shifting between colors, sometimes deep, endless pools of darkness, other times burning with an infernal glow. His lips curved in a knowing smile, the kind a man wears when he holds all the cards. You have drawn my interest, Gregor. The stranger's voice was smooth, like silk woven with whispers of forgotten tongues. I have watched you, felt the ripples of your existence in the fabric of the world. You are special, but you do not yet understand the purpose of your gifts. Gregor did not speak. He merely studied the figure before him, his face unreadable. The man stepped closer, though the fire did not cast his shadow. I come bearing an offer, he continued. Men of great ambition, men of power, have long sought me. They have called for me in their prayers, their whispers, their desperate moments before death. They have traded their souls for a mere taste of what I can grant. And yet, you, the stranger's lips curled, you have never once asked for anything. I have all that I need, Gregor said simply. A low chuckle, rich and amused. Oh, but you misunderstand, my young friend. I do not offer petty things like gold or land. I offer something greater. A destiny beyond kings and emperors. A dominion beyond what human hands can grasp. Gregor leaned forward, his hands resting upon his knees. And what price do you ask? The stranger smiled wider, revealing teeth a shade too white, too perfect. Ah, you are wise. You know that all gifts bear cost. He tilted his head. But what if I told you the price was merely acceptance? That all you must do is take what is already yours? You were born for greatness, Gregor. The heavens and hells alike whisper your name. Why resist what is inevitable? Gregor studied him for a long moment, then took a slow breath. Because I can smell the brimstone on your breath. For the first time, the stranger faltered. It was the smallest shift, a flicker in his ever-calm expression, a tightening at the edges of his eyes. But it was there. The fire crackled between them, and for a brief moment, silence reigned. Then, the stranger laughed. It was a sound both beautiful and terrible, echoing unnaturally in the vast emptiness of the night. Brimstone, he repeated. How quaint! He took a step forward, and the flames of the fire flickered unnaturally, bending toward him as if drawn by some unseen force. You truly are different. Most men, when they see me, tremble. They beg, they weep, they sell their very souls for a fraction of what I offer. He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. But you? You look at me as if I were nothing. Gregor's gaze remained steady. Because you are nothing. The laughter stopped. The air grew heavier, dense with something unseen. The stranger's form flickered for the briefest of moments, as though his very presence struggled to maintain itself in the space between worlds. The fire dimmed, the shadows grew longer, stretching outward like the fingers of something ancient and hungry. Then, just as suddenly, the moment passed. The stranger exhaled, his smirk returning, though now there was something forced about it. Very well, he said, stepping back. You refuse my gift. But know this, Gregor, no man denies me without consequence. He lifted a single finger, pointing toward the young man. You will regret this. When the weight of your existence grows unbearable, when the world turns against you, when you realize that you are utterly alone, remember this night. Remember that I offered you salvation, and you cast it aside. Gregor's expression did not change. Go, he said simply. The stranger's eyes darkened, two pits of void. I will return, he whispered. Then, without another word, he was gone, vanishing into the night as if he had never been there at all. The fire, now free from his presence, roared back to life. Gregor sat in silence for a long time, staring into the flames, the weight of what had just transpired settling over him. He knew the stranger had spoken the truth, no man denied him without consequence. The days ahead would be filled with trials, with suffering, with battles he could not yet foresee. But Gregor did not fear. He never had. Chapter 3: The Trials of Darkness. The night after Gregor denied the devil's bargain, the air itself seemed to shift. A storm unlike any before it swept across the land, though no rain fell. Instead, the wind howled with voices, whispers of things unseen, things ancient and bitter. Shadows stretched where no light was cast, and the stars above flickered like dying embers. The devil was not one to be denied, and he had no intention of letting Gregor's defiance go unpunished. It began with fire. Gregor was hunting in the woods when he smelled the acrid stench of smoke. He turned toward the village, his heart steady, but his mind already knowing what he would find. By the time he reached the outskirts, the sky glowed orange with flames licking at the rooftops. People screamed, running through the streets, but the fire moved unnaturally, consuming everything with an insatiable hunger. The well ran dry, the river refused to flow, and the wooden beams burned as though soaked in oil. His family's home, the place where he had been raised, was nothing more than a pile of charred timber. He stood before the ruins, unmoving. "Gregor," a voice cried, a neighbor, stumbling toward him, his face blackened with soot. "It happened so fast, your family." Gregor already knew the answer, but he asked anyway. "Did any survive?" The man could not meet his eyes. He only shook his head, and Gregor nodded once, expression unreadable. He felt the weight of the devil's hand in this, but he did not speak the name. He did not wail or curse. He only turned from the burning wreckage and walked away. The fire was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, his land, once fertile and green, withered under an unseen blight. Crops blackened before they could ripen, and the soil turned to dust under his fingertips. The river, which had flowed strong for generations, became a thin trickle of foul water. Livestock fell ill, their bodies shriveling as if something unseen drained them from within. The village, once filled with laughter and the simple joys of everyday life, became a place of silent despair. People whispered of curses, of omens, and always, their eyes would drift toward Gregor, the man who had never been like the rest of them. Then came the sickness. It started as a fever, sweeping through the villages like a plague. Children, the elderly, even the strongest hunters, none were spared. Those who fell to it withered quickly, their skin turning pale, their eyes hollow with suffering. Healers tried their herbs, but nothing worked. One by one, they fell, and as death walked among them, fear turned to something more dangerous, blame. A gathering was called. The village square was packed with people, their faces gaunt, their expressions hard. Gregor stood before them, unmoving, listening as the whispers turned to accusations. "He is cursed." This all began after he defied the stranger. "The devil himself walks in his shadow." Gregor met their stares with silence. He did not plead, did not defend himself. It was then that an old man, the village elder, stepped forward, his voice shaking but firm. "Gregor," he said, "you are not like the rest of us. This much we have always known. Tell me, and speak truth, did you bring this upon us?" A lesser man might have bowed under the weight of so many eyes, so many desperate voices seeking an answer, any answer, to their suffering. But Gregor was not a lesser man. He raised his head, golden eye glinting in the firelight. "No." The word was simple, absolute. And yet, it was not enough. The people were afraid. They needed something to fight, something to blame, and the devil had given them a perfect target. A man who did not break, who did not kneel, who had denied even the Lord of Darkness himself. A stone was thrown. It struck Gregor's shoulder, though he did not flinch. Another followed, then another. Soon, the mob raged. Gregor stood, taking the blows, his face never shifting from its calm. When they had exhausted their anger, when their arms were sore and their chests heaving with heavy breath, he finally spoke. "Is that all you have?" The words cut through the silence like a blade. The people, still trembling with rage and fear, stepped back. They did not understand him, and they feared what they could not break. And so, rather than kill him, they exiled him. Gregor walked away from the village, stepping over the stones they had cast, his path leading him into the wilderness beyond. He did not look back. The devil watched from the shadows, waiting, expecting him to curse the heavens, to break beneath the weight of his suffering. But instead, Gregor did something unexpected. He laughed. It was not the laughter of a madman, nor one born of bitterness. It was the laughter of a man who saw through the game, who knew the trials were nothing more than tricks played by a desperate force that sought to own him. He turned his gaze upward, as if speaking to the night itself. "Is that all you have?" The words carried through the darkness, reaching ears unseen. And in that moment, the devil felt something he had not felt in eternity. Doubt. Chapter 4: The Shadow and the Blade. The years that followed Gregor's exile turned him into something more than a man. He became a legend whispered among kings and warlords, a name spoken with reverence and fear alike. Wherever he wandered, he left behind stories of impossible feats, of battles won against overwhelming odds, of foes who fell before they could even raise their blades, of assassins who vanished into the night without leaving a wound upon him. The world came to know him as a warrior who could not be felled, a man who stood at the edge of mortality but never crossed it. His legend reached the ears of rulers who sought his counsel. Some wished to make him their general, to lead armies to conquest. Others feared him, seeking to destroy what they could not understand. None succeeded. Arrows shattered upon his skin like brittle twigs. Poisons turned to water in his veins. Daggers meant for his heart found only empty air, as if fate itself twisted to keep him from harm. He did not seek war, but war found him, time and again. And in each battle, he stood at the center of the storm, untouchable, unbroken. But the devil watched from the shadows, growing more restless with each tale that reached his ears. Gregor had defied him once, and now he was becoming something far worse, a symbol of defiance itself, a force beyond fear, beyond corruption. The balance of the world, the quiet suffering the devil had so carefully nurtured, was shifting. If men began to believe in one who could not be broken, what would happen to the power of darkness? And so, the devil made his move. One evening, as Gregor stood upon a barren hilltop, surveying the valley below, a stranger approached. He was clad in black armor, his presence heavy as a storm about to break. His face was concealed beneath a hood of shadows, and his eyes burned with an eerie red glow, like embers smoldering in the dark. Though he spoke no words, Gregor knew what he was. A demon. Not just any demon, but the devil's most loyal warrior, a creature forged in the deepest pits of the underworld, a being whose blade had cut down kings, saints, and men who thought themselves beyond fear. He had no name, only a purpose, to destroy that which defied his master. Gregor smiled. So he sends another errand boy. The demon unsheathed his sword, a weapon unlike any other. Its blade pulsed with a darkness that seemed to swallow the light, as if the very concept of hope unraveled in its presence. 1,000 souls had perished by its edge, their last screams still echoing in its cursed steel. Gregor drew his own weapon, a simple blade, worn by years of battle. It had no enchantment, no unholy power, only the strength of the man who wielded it. The demon struck first. Lightning fast, his blade cleaved through the air, seeking Gregor's flesh with supernatural precision. But Gregor was already moving, his body twisting just beyond reach. Steel met steel, and the valley echoed with the sound of their clash. The force of the impact sent tremors through the ground, splitting the earth where they stood. The battle raged on. For hours, they fought, moving with a speed that seemed beyond mortal limits. Each time the demon lunged, Gregor evaded. Each time Gregor struck, the demon met him with equal fury. The night stretched on, the stars bearing witness to a duel that should have long ended. But something was wrong. The demon, for all his power, could not land a killing blow. His strikes, which had ended kings and warriors, found only air. He began to falter, a hesitation creeping into his movements. And Gregor, ever calm, saw it. With a single step forward, he forced the demon back. Again. And again. His strikes became relentless, his footwork unshakable. The demon, once the hunter, was now the hunted. Then, in a single decisive motion, Gregor drove his sword through the demon's chest. For the first time in its cursed existence, the demon gasped. Not in pain, but in disbelief. Its eyes widened as it realized the truth. It could die. Gregor twisted the blade, and with a final, shuddering breath, the demon fell to its knees. Its form began to unravel, shadows peeling away like smoke in the wind, until nothing remained but the empty husk of its armor. The cursed blade it had wielded lay beside it, now nothing more than lifeless metal. Gregor wiped his sword clean and sheathed it. He did not speak. He did not celebrate. He simply turned and walked away. Far below, in the unseen depths of the underworld, the devil sat in silence. His most loyal warrior had been defeated. The unthinkable had happened. For the first time in all of existence, the devil felt fear. Chapter 5: The Whisper of Immortality. The devil had tried fire and ruin. He had torn away everything Gregor held dear, sent his most fearsome warrior to cut him down, and yet the man stood unbroken. The underworld murmured with unease. If Gregor could not be destroyed by force, then perhaps there was another way. And so, the devil changed his tactics. Men did not fear death alone, they feared the weight of existence, the emptiness that stretched beyond battles, beyond victories. They feared loneliness. They feared love lost. And so, the devil sent not another warrior, but something far more dangerous. Gregor had long since left behind the battlefields of kings. The world still spoke his name in hushed tones, but he walked alone now, his path leading him into the depths of forgotten lands, where even the bravest men dared not tread. He had crossed frozen mountains where the wind howled like dying spirits, wandered deserts where the sun burned all who defied it, and passed through ancient forests that whispered secrets older than mankind itself. It was in such a place, beneath the branches of an ancient oak that had stood for 1,000 years, that she appeared. She stepped from the shadows as if woven from them, her form untouched by the dust of the road or the weight of the world. Her beauty was something beyond mortal comprehension, like the dawn's first light, like a song that had no beginning or end. Her eyes, deep as the abyss, held the promise of eternity. "You are alone," she said, her voice a melody laced with sorrow. Gregor did not answer. He had seen illusions before, mirages sent to weaken the mind. He knew temptation when it stood before him. She stepped closer, and the air around her shimmered, as though the very world bent to her presence. "You have no kingdom, no home, no hand to hold in the dark. Tell me, does the weight of your solitude not press against your soul?" Still, Gregor did not speak. She reached out, her fingers barely brushing his arm. It was not the touch of a warrior, nor the grip of an enemy. It was something softer, something that called to a part of him buried deep beneath the years of battle. And for the first time, Gregor felt something stir. Not weakness, not desire. Something older. She smiled, sensing it. "Even you, the man who defied the devil, cannot deny what you truly are. You are not stone. You are not steel. You are flesh and blood, and men, no matter how strong, are meant to love." Gregor exhaled slowly. He could hear the lie hidden in the truth. He had loved once. Long ago, before the devil's shadow had fallen upon his life. He had known warmth, the comfort of another's hand, the quiet understanding shared in a gaze. He had known love not as a weapon, but as something pure. But that love had died in the flames of his past. He had buried it alongside everything else. The woman circled him, her movements fluid as water. "Come with me," she whispered. "Leave behind the cold emptiness you have chosen. No more wandering. No more war. I offer you peace, Gregor." The name fell from her lips like a promise. For a moment, the world around him stilled. Peace. A life untouched by battle, by the endless weight of defiance. A place where he was no longer hunted, no longer a threat to the order of things. A place where he was simply a man. But even as the thought brushed against his mind, he knew the truth. He turned to her, his golden eye burning like a dying sun. "You think I fear loneliness," he said, his voice steady. "No. I fear nothing." The illusion shattered. The woman let out a breath, and for the first time, Gregor saw her for what she was. Beneath the beauty lay something older than time, a being shaped from shadows, crafted to ensnare even the strongest of men. She had no name, for she had never needed one. She had broken emperors, whispered lies into the ears of scholars, led great warriors to ruin. She was the devil's greatest weapon, his final trick. And she had failed. She took a step back, the weight of eternity behind her gaze. "You will regret this," she whispered. Gregor tilted his head. "Will I?" A wind stirred the trees, and when he blinked, she was gone. Far below, in the depths where no light reached, the devil sat upon his throne of embers and sighed. Gregor had resisted power, resisted fear, resisted suffering. Now, he had resisted love. The balance of the world had shifted. And for the first time, the devil wondered if Gregor was something more than a man after all. Chapter 6: The Devil's Last Gamble. The devil had tried everything. He had unleashed his fury upon Gregor, torn his world apart, sent his most fearsome demons to strike him down, and even offered him love in its most seductive form. Yet nothing had broken him. Gregor remained defiant, unwavering in his resistance to the will of hell. And so, the devil did something he had never done before. He descended to the mortal world, not as a king of damnation, not as a whisperer of temptation, but as a beggar. Gregor sat by a dying fire in the ruins of an old temple. The stars stretched endlessly above him, cold and indifferent. The land was silent, as if even the night itself held its breath. He had traveled far, walked roads that no longer existed on any map, and yet, he knew he was being followed. Then, he heard the footsteps. Slow. Careful. Almost hesitant. Gregor did not look up as the figure approached. He simply stirred the embers with a stick and waited. The wind carried the scent of something unnatural, something not of this world. A voice broke the silence, soft and weary. "It is a strange thing to see you at peace." Gregor smirked. Strange? Or unsettling? The voice chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Perhaps both. Finally, Gregor lifted his gaze and met the eyes of the one who had tormented him for so long. But it was not the devil he had expected. Gone was the figure of arrogance and power, the being who had shaped empires and broken kings. Instead, before him stood a man clad in tattered robes, his face worn with age, his hands trembling as if burdened by centuries of unseen weight. His once fiery eyes were dim, not with deceit, but with exhaustion. He was the devil, yes, but stripped of all his grandeur. Gregor raised an eyebrow. "So, this is your final trick? To appear weak? To make me pity you?" The devil sighed. "No tricks, Gregor. No more games." He sat across from him, the firelight flickering in his hollow eyes. "I have come to make you an offer." Gregor chuckled, shaking his head. "Haven't we played this game already? This time, I have nothing to tempt you with. No illusions. No deceptions. Only the truth." The devil exhaled, and the wind carried a deep, weary sorrow. "You are beyond human. You have defied not just me, but the very nature of man. No fear touches you. No suffering bends you. No love ensnares you. You exist outside of everything I have ever understood." Gregor listened in silence, his expression unreadable. The devil continued, his voice softer than before. "You have done what no man has done before, you have changed the balance of all things." He looked up, and for the first time in eternity, there was something almost like sincerity in his gaze. "You have broken the order of the world, Gregor. You stand outside fate itself. And that terrifies me." Gregor leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Terrifies you?" The devil nodded. "Men are meant to succumb. To fall, to yield, to be shaped by the forces that govern them. Yet, you refuse." He sighed again, the weight of his own words pressing upon him. "I will grant you anything, immortality, godhood, the power to shape the world as you see fit. All I ask is that you leave." Gregor tilted his head. "Leave?" The devil's gaze did not waver. "This world cannot hold you, Gregor. Your defiance disrupts everything. You are a threat to the laws that bind existence itself. If you remain, there will be consequences beyond even my understanding." His voice dropped to a whisper. "If you stay, you will unmake the world." For a long time, Gregor did not answer. The fire crackled between them, its warmth a fleeting comfort against the vast, indifferent night. Then, finally, Gregor smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You asked me to flee?" His voice was steady, unshaken. "You, who have never feared anything?" He leaned closer, the firelight dancing in his golden eye. "That means I have already won." The devil did not speak. He only stared, as the truth of those words settled into the marrow of his being. For the first time in eternity, he had been bested, not by a warrior, not by a scholar, not by a king, but by a man who simply refused to bow. A gust of wind swept through the ruins, scattering embers into the air. When Gregor blinked, the devil was gone. Only silence remained. In the realms above and below, the echoes of that night stretched into eternity. The devil had lost his last gamble. And the world would never be the same. Chapter 7: The Man Who Walked Alone. Gregor was never seen again. The night he bested the devil, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind carried no whispers of his fate, the stars above did not tell his story, and the earth beneath his feet left no trace of where he had gone. He simply vanished. But men do not forget legends. In the years that followed, stories of Gregor took on a life of their own. Some swore they had seen him wandering the edges of the world, dressed in a tattered cloak, his golden eye gleaming beneath his hood. They spoke of a lone traveler who never aged, who arrived at the doors of kings and beggars alike, offering no name but leaving behind truths that changed the course of men's lives. A merchant in Damascus claimed he met a man who could not be bribed, who spoke with the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes. A warrior on the steppes of Mongolia told of a duel with a swordsman whose blade never dulled, who fought with the patience of the wind and the strength of the earth. A priest in Rome whispered of a visitor who sat in the shadows of the cathedral and, with a single glance, shattered his understanding of faith. And then, there were those who believed Gregor had ascended. That his defiance of hell and rejection of heaven had placed him beyond mortality, beyond even time itself. Some said he had walked into the mountains where no man dared tread and disappeared into the mist, swallowed by the heavens. Others claimed he had simply stepped into the ocean one day, walking calmly across the waves, never to return. The devil, too, was never the same. Where once he had whispered in the ears of kings and conquerors, now he hesitated. Where once he had waged wars upon the souls of men with boundless arrogance, now there was an unseen doubt lurking in the corners of his mind. What if, somewhere, Gregor was watching? The lords of hell whispered among themselves. They feared their master had changed. Some claimed he had grown weaker, that the certainty he once carried had been shattered by the man who had defied him. Others whispered of darker possibilities, that he still searched for Gregor, not to destroy him, but to understand him. To learn what it meant to truly be free. Centuries passed. The world changed. Empires rose and fell. The names of kings and heroes faded from history. But the tale of Gregor remained. He became a myth, a cautionary tale told around dying fires. A name that made even the most powerful rulers pause. Some feared him, some revered him, but none dismissed him. For in all the realms of existence, from the highest heavens to the darkest corners of hell, one truth remained unshaken. There was only one man the devil feared. And perhaps, somewhere, he still walked alone.